Hey, so some of you have been asking me how I do my croissant lamination, and today I'm going to show you how I do the lamination and the baking of croissants and pain au chocolat. So let's get started. The first step is to make the butter sheet pliable. For that, I roll over it with my rolling pin a couple of times to make sure that it's pliable but still cold. So the butter has been resting in the fridge for about 1 hour. So it is firm, but it's also not rock solid, right? So if it was, then even more important to roll over it. But here it was only 1 hour, so it's still fairly pliable because I was rolling over it. Then I wrap it back up into parchment paper and put it back to the fridge. So really the idea is to make it pliable but keep it cold. Then I will get the dough that has been resting in the fridge for at least 8 hours or ideally 24 hours to develop some flavor. And since it has been bulk proofing for 1 hour, there's usually some gas in it that has to go out. And after unwrapping the dough, I will basically start rolling over it to press any gas out of the dough. It's also possible to skip the bulk proof, but in my experience, it is good to bulk proof. I wouldn't say it is definitely necessary, but for some reason I like what it does to the dough, and it also just ensures that there was enough yeast multiplication in the beginning, which I think sometimes was an issue for me if I didn't do that. Cool, so now I roll out the dough to the double length of the butter sheet, same width of the butter sheet, so here it's about 18 centimeters by 36 centimeters for the dough. My butter sheet is about 18 by 18 centimeters. And as you can see, I also use some dusting flour to make the surface of the dough as dry as possible so that when I add the butter, it doesn't stick to the dough, but is basically stays very loose on top of it. So now I realized the dough is not long enough because it shrank a little bit, but that's no problem. I just roll over it again, make it longer, and now it fits nicely. What's important now is to just stitch the dough together. Make sure that the butter will stay inside the dough before we start with the folding. Some people leave the sides open, especially when using sheeters. There, I think it makes sense because it just really ensures that the butter flows from end to end. But when I tried that, I usually end up with butter on my table. It smears. It's just a mess. So I don't like that. I try to keep everything closed, and then I can start rolling. So the important part about rolling here is that I use my rolling pin and start in the middle of the dough and then roll towards the end. As you can see, I then also rotate the dough. So by doing that, you can really feel how you push the butter further and further out. You don't make the mistake of, I don't know, going from end to end, but then don't have the right amount of force, or you accidentally put too much pressure on in the middle and then actually you don't continue pushing the butter further. By doing that, starting in the middle, pushing or rolling towards the outside, that just works really well for me. And then as the dough gets longer, I also then tend to use the handles of my rolling pin for less heavy but more speedy movements. Once I have a good length, I will just cut or trim the ends, which you don't have to do, but it's kind of a good quality check just to see if there's butter in the trimmings. If it is, then everything's really good. And that means the folding now will be, yeah, we will be off with a good start. You see, I do the foldings and always use some water spray to make sure the dough sticks to itself, and then also roll over it to make sure it's flat, but don't put too much pressure on it, because now we have been laminating it for maybe two or 3 or maybe 4 minutes, so the butter will start to get a bit warm, and so the longer it's out at room temperature, the riskier it gets. So now the dough will rest in the fridge for 30 minutes, and after 30 minutes I'll take it out again. Now the dough has relaxed and is again cold, which of course is important. We don't want the butter to get soft or warm or anything like that. We don't want to hear any smearing or squishy sounds from the butter. We want it to be cold. And now use some dusting flour just to make sure that the dough doesn't stick too much to the table. And again, I start rolling over it now for the second fold. Start in the center, roll outside. You see the ramp that is building, and then again I try to push outside. I don't try to it's all about the forward movement. It's not like pressing from the top everything down. It's really just pushing everything forward. I think this is a similar movement than a sheeter would do, because also there you kind of like press the dough through the rolls. So yeah, I think I took some inspiration there from looking at how sheeters work. And here you can see, yeah, it's not easy to roll it out. The dough is also sliding, which of course is not great, so maybe less dusting flour would be better if it sticks. But then again, it can also lead to some other, to just sticking and then actually ending up with too thin of a dough. Or, I don't know. I prefer to do it this way. This results in awesome lamination. And yeah, the only important thing is with dusting flour, just make sure that you use a water spray to then clean the dough after rolling it. Make sure there's no dusting flour on it. Really spray it, make sure it's sticky so that it can stick to itself. And then after each fold, just make sure it's nice and clean and aligned. And then dusting flour is no problem in my opinion. Again, the dough now will be wrapped up. And this time it will go to the fridge for 2 hours. So now it's important that before we do the final rollout, that the dough gets really, really cold, like down to the core, and also has time to relax, because when we do the final rollout, it will be anyway really tough. And if the dough isn't relaxed, it's basically no point in trying to do it. So for me, 2 hours is really good sweet spot. Of course you could do it longer, but then it depends a little bit. The butter might get also too hard. If you do it shorter, you will have some problems, I think. Again, I use dusting flour. I think in the process I used a little bit too much overall, but it's a fine balance. Alright, now the final rollout. Again, you see me using the same rolling pin for the beginning. And again, I try to roll out from the center towards outside. Of course, it's a very thick and small package in the beginning. So it's important to just rotate the dough a lot, because it starts out almost like square or like a, I don't know, small rectangle. And it's important to not roll just in one direction, because then this would end up in a very thin dough, and eventually you would also make a mistake, and the layers would move at different speeds. You could end up with something, yeah, with really a poor lamination. So just make sure to make it nice and balanced and even, and just try to roll out all the sides evenly. At some point the dough will get too large, so I have to switch to a different rolling pin, which is just a really long and straight rolling pin. And for that I then also use two kind of like plastic strips on the sides. Those are 3 millimeters thick, and they help me to roll out the dough to the final size and prevent that the dough gets too thin. So what I don't want is, I don't want to have, like, by accident push down on the dough too much and then end up with like 1 or 2 millimeters. I never want that, so I use these guardrails to make sure the dough doesn't get too thin anywhere. So I can apply quite a lot of force, which I actually need for the dough, but I don't have any risk. So this is really, really helpful, really great. And by using 3 millimeter guardrails, I also know that I will end up with like 4 millimeter or 5 millimeter thick dough. I will actually never go down to 3 because the dough always retracts and shrinks. So yeah, before I was using 4 millimeter guardrails, but then always ended up with 5 or 6 millimeter dough. So that's when I basically changed the setup and used thinner guardrails, and those work perfectly. I think we could even go down to 2.5 or even 2 millimeters. That would just give us even thinner dough. But that's then a matter of style, what you actually want, how distinct the layers should be in the end product. And it also then depends on if you want to do some stretching in the end or not. Cool, so now the dough went into the freezer for 12 minutes to again relax, but more importantly to just get cold again, because this final rollout takes quite some time, and the butter layers are so thin, so if they warm up, it can really ruin the lamination. So it's important to really keep the dough really cold. Putting it in the freezer in the end is really game-changing, because it buys you so much more time for then the shaping, and also just to be able to even roll the dough out to the final size. So my target size here is 30 by 30 centimeters. That basically means I have to roll larger than that, because again the dough will shrink. So I might be rolling to 32 by 34 or something like that. Definitely a little bit larger, because we also will do some trimmings. You don't have to trim, but for me the trimming here is really important, because all the edges of the dough are not perfect. Just by the way the lamination works, or the rolling works here, they will be of poor quality. And so trimming it is really important just for the visual in the end, because you will see the edges, and if they are not nice, the croissants won't look nice. How much to trim depends a little bit. You can usually see it from the top surface. You kind of see where the bad lamination starts, and so it's usually between 1 and 2 centimeters, I would say. And these trimmings, they are still laminated dough, they are still nice and taste good. And these can be used to make croissants, or just some other things. You can still bake them, and I will do that in the end. Cool, so now we have a nice rectangle, and now it's time to cut. I make some marks on the dough, so I want to have 4 croissants and 2 pain au chocolat. So I do marks at 9, 18, and then let me think, 9, 18, and then 24 and 30 centimeters. So my pain au chocolat are 6 on the base, and my croissants are 9 centimeter at the base. So here I cut 2 rectangles first for the croissants that I will later split diagonally, and for the pain au chocolat again I cut also 2 smaller rectangles that I will here also then roll first. So for that I get some chocolate sticks that I prepared. You can get, of course, real batons to do it. It's difficult for me to get them, so I use some local chocolate that's easy to get for me. That comes in sticks, and I can split them in half and then split those again to have 2 sticks, which I'm not 100% sure if that's actually good. I know that this like bakeries do it that way, but you could also just do one bigger chocolate stick. But yeah, it kind of looks cool to have these 2, but I'm never sure if what gives the better crumb in the end. Okay, so I have my 2 pain au chocolat, which are 6 by 30 centimeters, and now I will cut my croissants. So I will just make some diagonal cuts, and the triangles will be, of course, a little bit like not symmetrical, but what we can do there then later is to stretch them a bit. But before I do it, I spray them off with water, just to make sure that there's no dusting flour on the surface, and that the dough is really sticky. Now I roll them up. Nothing special here, just a little bit more pressure in the beginning because the dough is still quite cold, and just to make sure that this core is nice and tight. But then as I roll further, it becomes more loose. Sometimes I even also roll from the tips to make sure that they get a little bit more thinner. But yeah, I think here there's a lot of variation you can do. Some people also like to cut very long triangles or stretch on them a lot. But I try not to stretch too much, because that can also end up with very thin layers or destroyed layers, or it's a bit more unpredictable. And I feel like, of course, if you do 100 croissants or like super large doughs, then you will get the hang of it. You can do it, but yeah, I try to just don't do it too extremely. The croissants go into the freezer overnight. I will bake them the next day. So I just move them to something that you can put to the freezer. Make sure to have the parchment paper on it so they don't stick, and then cover it with like a plastic bag. And the pain au chocolat I will proof right away. So I will take them and put them on a baking sheet with parchment paper, and then cover them up so they don't dry out. These will proof for about 4 hours at room temperature, which now here in winter is about 21 to 22 degrees Celsius. And this works really nicely for me. The common proofing environment is like 27 degrees Celsius and 2 hours or 2.5 hours, but I find it really difficult to create that environment. Even in an oven and with warm water, it's difficult. Here we can see the lamination. 12 butter layers, 13 dough layers. Very, very nice, in my opinion. Of course, can always be even nicer, especially if you use a sheeter, but doing it by hand, I'm really satisfied with the result. And 4 hours later, this is how the pain au chocolat look like, and the graffin in the back. So here you see nicely how the layers separated, which is a really good indication for nice proofing. We're nowhere near overproofing. Like, these could stay out for 2 hours more and they would still be fine. But I like it if it's not too much proofing, because then the layers will just be more clearly visible. And by seeing this separation, I also know that the proof is enough, and it will be very open, like the crumb will be open. And there's no need to touch them or shake them or... No, you can, for pain au chocolat it's really easy to tell because it's so easy visible. For croissants it's a little bit more difficult, but again, just give them enough time and it should work. And I definitely recommend the room temperature proofing. So in the oven for 18 to 20 minutes for at like 180 degrees Celsius. And out here come. Nicely baked, nice and dark. That's how I like them. I could bake them a bit shorter or at only 170 degrees Celsius. But yeah, honestly, this is how I like them. A little bit crispy on the outside and then very fluffy and open on the inside. You can see a little hole there with the pain au chocolat, and that will be a little bit of an issue. Like, if I see these holes, I know, oh, there was some dusting flour, which, yes, I didn't brush off, I didn't spray them. So what happened here is actually the dough didn't stick to itself in the core. That's a common mistake that happens from time to time with pain au chocolat for me. It's not a big issue, but it will mean that now when we cut open the crumb, we will see a gap, or like some hollow room where basically the layers didn't connect nicely and then collapsed a little bit.